there. We are starting Dorothy's story time, and we are reading a Frank Peretti book, The Door in the Dragon's Throat. This is book 1. It's a Cooper Kids Adventure series. It's aimed for young people, but it's such a good read. So, book 1's synopsis is, Jay and Lila Cooper have been on adventures with their archaeologist father before, but nothing like this. As they make their way through the dark and mysterious cavern, they can't help thinking about the other exploration parties that tried to open the door. All fled in panic or died terrible deaths. Incredible riches from a lost... What lies behind the door? Incredible riches from a lost kingdom or some ancient evil. They must find the key and discover themselves the truth about the Nepurian legends. Jay and Lila know one thing for certain. They've been protected in many dangerous circumstances before, but will they be able to overcome whatever force lurks beneath the door in the dragon's throat? A rip-roaring yarn filled with danger and intrigue, ending with a titanical clash between the forces of good and evil. I hope you enjoy. Chapter 1. In the arid and strife-torn Middle East, land of Bible adventures, wars, camels and kings, in the tiny, secluded, and landlocked nation of Nippur, a nation known for its strange customs and ancient mysteries, pompous President Dalum, chief magistrate and bearer of the royal scepter, sat and fidgeted at his huge marble desk in the presidential palace. An incredibly wealthy oil sheik, President Dalum, always wore a long, diamond-studded purple robe, gold rings on his fingers, and a very impressive silk turban on his head. He loved being his country's president. He loved being rich. He loved being powerful. Right now, his huge desk was piled with important papers and business of state that needed his official attention. But he couldn't concentrate on any of those things. His mind was too flooded with thoughts of becoming even richer. An excited knock on the big double doors to his office interrupted his daydreams, and a voice called excitedly, "Mr. President, my liege." Dalum had been waiting all morning to hear that rough, raspy voice. "Goes in! Come in! Come in!" The big doors burst open, and in came Gozin, a bearded, rugged desert rat of a man. Dalum imagined a small cloud of dust escorting his assistant into the office. Gozin always seemed to have a common man air about him. Gozin removed his big straw hat and made a hurried, bow. "They have arrived," Gozin reported excitedly. The president rose from his desk, arms reaching heavenward in delight. "Ah, at last! Dr. Cooper's expedition is finally here. Now we will see what these Americans are capable of. Tell me, how many men did he bring?" Gozin started counting his fingers as he watched faces in his mind. The president was impatient. "Well, how many are in the expedition? He must have brought many, perhaps 30, 40 men." "Oh no, my liege, only his children and 3 workers. "Children?" The president was obviously unhappy, and that always made Gozin feel a little edgy. Gozin tried to break the news gently. "Yes, not small children, mind you. A young man and a young lady." Dalum slammed his fist on his desk and started pacing around the room, his purple robe flowing behind him like a peacock's tail. "What kind of a fool is this Cooper? The president fumed. Children will only get in the way, get into trouble. I warned him of the great dangers. I also tried to tell him of the dangers, my liege, but he insists that he goes on no assignment without them. Apparently, they are very well trained and can take care of themselves. The president looked intently at Gozan with an expression he usually saved for decreeing death sentences. Gozan bowed, hoping to cool his superior down at least a little. Gozan, this is no task for children. It will take an army, not just 4 men and 2 children. Dalum only shook his perplexed head. They will all be killed the first day. The dragon's throat has no mercy. Gozan only shrugged, his eyes rolling. Hey? It will not be the first time. But they must succeed, the president bellowed. Someday, somehow, someone must succeed. Gozan bowed again and stayed bowed for a few moments. He knew that what he was about to say could be risky. Mr. President, many have tried and no one has succeeded. Not the German expedition with 40 men and heavy machinery. Not the team from France who seemed so bold and confident. The United Nations exploration team couldn't even enter the dragon's throat before half of them were killed by scorpions and cobras. The Swiss expedition vowed never to return. You've sent letters to nations all over the world, but no one will dare go near the dragon's throat. May my liege live forever, but why did you invite a mere scientist from America and his 2 young children? What made you think they could succeed where all the others have failed? The president spoke in a lowered voice. I have heard reports about them. I have been told they are fearless. They are a peculiar kind of Christian. Gozan snuffed his nose and said, Christians. Of what value is that? Others have claimed to be Christians. The president's eyebrow arched upward, crinkling his forehead. Yes, but these people are different. They hold a very deep belief in their God. So much so, they derive some kind of special power from this deity. I don't understand their kind of religion, but they do not have the same fears as we do. Gozan only laughed. Ha! They've never tried to enter the dragon's throat. They've never tried to open the door. They will learn to fear. But they must open the door, the president shouted in a sudden burst of anger. Anything so impregnable, so fortified, so guarded by curses must contain incredible riches. I must have that treasure. I could use some of that myself. These Christians are perhaps our last hope. We must do all we can to make sure they succeed. The president looked at Gozan, and Gozan bowed again. Gozan, I am making you responsible to help them. Give the American scientist every courtesy. Take him and his expedition to the dragon's throat and escort them to the door. Make sure they have whatever they need. Gozan bowed hurriedly. Yes, Mr. President. All that you instruct, I shall do. Suddenly, Dalum's words struck home. Did you say escort them to the door? One of the president's eyebrows scrunched down over his eye. Why, yes, you are a native Nippurian, an aide to the state and its president. You've been to the dragon's throat many times. But never inside it. You've accompanied many expeditions. You can go along with this one also to make sure nothing goes wrong. With your experience and the many horrible failures you've witnessed, you can anticipate the problems before they arise. Your assistance will be invaluable. Gozan's voice sounded like he had marbles in his throat. But surely you don't mean me going with them into the dragon's throat? Now the president's other eyebrow crunched down. I want to know once and for all just what it is that keeps happening down there. Most of all, I want them to succeed. I want you with them at all times, observing their efforts and making sure they do not fail. I want you to report back to me and let me know how they fare. My liege, live forever, but are you opposing my will? Gozan bowed deeply and answered quickly, Your will is my will, my liege. The president smiled, his temper soothed. Go, meet them at the airport and assist them for my benefit. At the airport, consisting of one very small, tar-surfaced runway in the middle of numerous wind-whisked sand dunes, in the middle of Dr. Jake Cooper stood beside the large cargo plane, supervising the unloading of his cargo and surveying the surrounding landscape. Dr. Cooper was handsome, rugged, tall, and strong with blonde hair. His intense expression and observant eyes indicated an inner commitment to tasks well done. He wore a hat to shade his face from the hot desert sun and work clothes that had already been through many challenging experiences. So this is Nipper, he said to himself, his eyes taking it all in. From one end of the horizon to the other, Nipper was mostly desert, sand dunes, low, bristly bush, hot rocks, scorpions, and snakes. The population consisted mostly of nomadic tribes roaming the desert, herding sheep and goats, riding camels, and dodging cobras and thieves. In the distance was Zahida, the capital city, where very rich oil sheiks lived in splendid mansions and very poor beggars lived in shacks, where one group hoarded all the wealth while the other group begged for the essentials of life. Only a short distance away, a pit viper sunned himself in the hot apron, and the nearby rocks and grasses tingled with the countless tiny wiggles and scurries of scorpions, lizards, and tarantulas. Napier was not an inviting place. Dr. Cooper's crew, unloading the cargo, was steadily building a sizable mound of crates, cases, and bags beside the plane. He continued to check off each item on his clipboard, checking, and rechecking. Tents, portable shelters, surveying equipment, instruments, climbing gear, tools, notebooks. His son Jay, 14, was busy unloading his own pet items, seismometer, sonar, cases of dynamite, and plastic explosives. He was blond, not too tall, very firm in build. He'd followed his father around the world for most of his life, and it showed. If he wasn't already tough as leather, he soon would be. Lila, 13, was years ahead of her age. Dr. Cooper's wife had been killed in a tomb cave-in in Egypt several years earlier, and Lila immediately began to occupy the empty space her mother had left behind. Archaeology was the only life any of them knew, and Lila took on the role of technician, organizer, and nurse with a real determination. At the moment, she was rechecking her inventory of food and provisions and making a note to herself to lay in extra medical supplies. In a place like this, someone was bound to get hurt sooner or later. What completed the gruesome picture welcoming them to Nippur was a strange sight at the rusting cyclone fence that bordered the airport. Directly opposite them, and for many, many yards along the fence in either direction, were crowds of people. Women carrying half-clothed children, dirty, sweating oil workers, herders, beggars. A cross-section of the population pressed against the fence like hungry cattle, nearly 200 of them, staring, ever staring, not smiling or returning any greeting from the expedition party. Lila asked very quietly, almost secretively, "What are they staring at?" Jay volunteered. I guess they've never seen Americans before. This place gives me the creeps, his sister concluded. Dr. Cooper was not one to buckle under mere creeps. Curiosity seekers, I imagine. Remember our arrival in that little village in Egypt? Any arrival of any airplane there was quite an occasion. Sure, Dad, said Jay. But those people smiled. They were excited. They were even a nuisance. These people... Dr. Cooper looked again at the growing crowd outside the fence. Their faces were etched with a strange uncertainty, making him feel like he and his crew were lepers, freaks, an oddity. With as subtle and non-threatening a move as he could manage, he reached for his .357 Magnum and buckled the gun belt around his waist. Everyone be in a state of caution. The Neparians are an unusually superstitious people. Not even Islam has taken a very strong hold here. What I'm saying is, the culture of this people makes them entirely unpredictable. Suddenly, people began to stir and shout, scrambling to step aside as an old jeep came roaring through the airport gate and on toward the plane. The driver was rather wild-looking, and his driving made the jeep seem more like a weapon than a vehicle. Dr. Cooper recognized him. That would be Gozan, our envoy from the capital. Gozan roared up to the plane, hit the brakes, and left black streaks of rubber on their apron as the jeep screeched to a halt. He jumped out, flipped off his hat, and bowed low. Greetings to you all, and welcome to Napier. Dr. Cooper introduced the eccentric character to his children and crew. This is Gozan, special aide to the president of this great nation, the exalted and majestic ruler and bearer of the royal scepter, His Greatness Dalum. Jay, Lila, and the crew gave Gozan a cordial bow. The aide grinned at Dr. Cooper. You did that very well. Dr. Cooper returned the smile. Thank you. You're looking well. I'd like to introduce my 3 technicians, Jeff Brannigan, Tom Foster, and Bill White. Gozan looked with appreciation at the 3 strong team members. And my 2 children, Jay and Lila. Gozan didn't look delighted over them at all. Yes, your children. We discussed them over the telephone, didn't we? Yes, Dr. Cooper replied firmly, and as you can see, I would not be dissuaded from bringing them. But they are so young. And very indisposable to me, Dr. Cooper countered. They are highly trained, highly responsible, and most of all, they are my family. Gozan finally shrugged and went on to the other business. We have reserved our best hotel rooms for you, your family, and your able crew. The very best the city of Zahida has to offer. Seeming to ignore the offer, Dr. Cooper queried, how are conditions for camping at the site? Gozan drew back in disbelief. You surely do not want to camp there, good doctor. But we do, if possible. If we could be close to our work, we would save a great deal of time and expense. Nothing is worth camping near the dragon's throat, not at any time, and never, never at night. Dr. Cooper shifted his weight forward just a little. He always did that when someone needed some extra convincing. We are equipped to do so. You understand. I'd like to see the site and then decide. Gozan shook his head, his eyes wide and darting. Believe me, this is not wise. The place is dangerous. It is cursed. We warned you of that in our letters. Yes, and I was fascinated to hear some of the folklore surrounding the dragon's throat. I found your old legends very informative, and I think the old superstitions might give us some clues as to what this strange cavern really is. You do not believe me, that the curse, that the dangers are real? I didn't say that, but we serve a mighty God who is greater than any curse, and his son, died to free us from all curses. Local superstitions, true or not, could provide helpful clues of origin for me, but I'm not of a mind to be frightened by them. I'm here to explore the dragon's throat, and I'm here to discover once and for all what might be found behind this mysterious door of yours. Gozan took a deep breath, sighed, then replaced his hat with a flourish. Ah, you are the confident one. I have vehicles ready to be loaded. If you wish to see the dragon's throat, to the dragon's throat we shall go. With a mocking grin he added, but I will keep your hotel rooms available for you to flee to, brave doctor. Life moves slowly in countries like Naipur. The vehicles Gozan had ready to be loaded had yet to be finagled from the local army base. Furthermore, the 2 jeeps and 2 trucks they finally were able to borrow and had already been through a few wars elsewhere in the world before they ended up in Naipur with battle scars, the creaks and rattles of old age, and no spare parts. The military vehicles led a long caravan, squeaking and rumbling its way through the desert in the hot afternoon, kicking up the dust and looking like a single file of ants on the vast, barren landscape. The 4 vehicles loaned to the expedition were followed by no less than 20 others, ranging from automobiles to bicycles to mules. The curious, staring crowd from the airport was following them, anxious to see what would happen at the dragon's throat. Gozan drove the lead jeep, with Dr. Cooper riding beside him, and Jay and Lila sitting in the back. Bill drove the other jeep, while Tom and Jeff drove the 2 trucks, now piled high with all the gear. Dr. Cooper was amazed at the crowd of people following them. Talk travels fast in Zahida, Gozan explained. They heard you were coming. They are the idle, the do-nothings, the curious. They know why you are here, and they don't want to miss a thing. What do they think they'll miss? Oh, some want to see the great treasure that will make our country, including them, very rich. The others, well, they have come to see you die. Dr. Cooper was getting a little tired of such talk. I don't intend to die, he stated matter-of-factly. Gozan laughed uproariously as if Dr. Cooper had told a joke. You intend to tamper with the forbidden door, Doctor. That always brings death. The caravan moved on, winding slowly through the dry, lifeless desert of sand, low brush, and towering rock formations. The ever-blowing wind, hot, dry, and sand-laden, howled mournfully among the rocks as scorpions scurried and snakes wrote repeating patterns in the sand. A few wild dogs ran across the road in front of the caravan, one carrying the dripping entrails of a recent kill. The jeep climbed a long, gradual rise, then neared the top. For a moment, all the passengers could see over the hood was the deep blue, cloudless sky. As the front of the jeep dropped, too suddenly it seemed, they gazed onto a sweeping panorama of the vast desert valley below. Gozan skidded the jeep to a stop in the gritty sand, and the whole caravan came to a halt behind them. There it is, brave doctor. Dr. Cooper stood up in the jeep and looked over the top of the dirty windshield. His eyes narrowed with great interest, and he pushed the brim of his hat back, a subtle gesture of amazement. Jay and Lila jumped out of the jeep and came up beside him to have a better look. It was an eerie sight. Below them stretched a wide, desolate valley bordered on either side by the low, sun-baked hills and rocky crags. The floor of the valley was peppered with low, bristly desert brush and scattered rocks. But in the very center of the valley, looking very unnatural, was a wide circular area, at least a quarter of a mile across, in which nothing, absolutely nothing, lived or existed. The ground inside the circle was ashen, a glistening, salty white, as if a meteor had hit or an explosion had blown everything within the circle to white, powdery dust. Furthermore, in the very center of this huge circle, the ground fell away into a deep hole, a dark, gaping cavern that looked like a sinister funnel, a bottomless whirlpool carved in rock and sand. The dragon's throat, Gozen said simply. A meteor crater? Dr. Cooper asked. No. Every expedition has thought that at first, but there was no explosion, no impact. It is a deep cavern in the middle of nowhere, with no cause or origin. Here for as long as history can remember. It is a pit that seems to drink in the rest of the earth. A home for death. Another legend, I suppose. As you know, we have many legends, Doctor. You can take your pick. The local nomadic tribes make this site the home of their many gods, a sacred place no one can approach under penalty of death for themselves and an eternal curse for their families. Some say it is the very throat through which the earth feeds, and many sacrifices have been cast into it. There is a story, too, about a young shepherd who lived long ago. He was seeking a stray goat and found it dead on the rim of the forbidden circle. He entered the circle himself to find out what had happened to his goat. Perhaps he entered the dragon's throat itself. No one knows. But he was never the same again and spent the rest of his days roaming the desert and living like an animal, wailing and howling in the hills around this valley. Dr. Cooper surveyed the craggy rocks and hills carefully. With just a little imagination, they could become a perfectly terrifying place for a legend to be born in the ghostly hours of the night. You haven't mentioned the legend that brought me here, Dr. Cooper said. The legend about the great star that used to sail across the heavens, that plundered the earth and hid his treasure deep within it. Yes, I recall that one. It has not been as popular, probably because it does not strike so much terror into the hearer's heart. Probably. And it could be the only one with a gem of truth in it. You see, Nippur is not that far from the location of ancient Babylon, the ancient kingdom of Nimrod mentioned in the Bible, Genesis chapter 10. I have not read it. Nimrod was a powerful ruler, regarded by his people as a deity. He plundered the earth and no doubt amassed an incredible treasure. If the legend and my interpretation of it are true, there could at least be a wealth of knowledge hidden here. New information on the early history of man right after the days of Noah. Gozen leaned back in his seat and shook his head slightly. In the service of your God again, good doctor? Absolutely, Dr. Cooper answered, peering down at the strange pit through a pair of binoculars. I make it my business to search out the remains of civilizations the Bible talks about. The information I uncover is invaluable to Bible scholars. If you manage to open the door, perhaps this Nimrod you speak of was a deity, and perhaps it is his curse that protects the door now. Where is this door you keep referring to? Oh, like we told you, somewhere down inside the dragon's throat. I have never seen it. Some claim to have seen something. Few have lived to tell us anything. Dr. Cooper turned to Jay and Lila, who were sharing another pair of binoculars. Any comments, you two? Jay looked at his father, then at Gozen. Our God is greater, he said with a shrug. Dr. Cooper smiled. My thoughts exactly. We will see, muttered Gozen. But first we'll have to find this door of yours, won't we? Gozen took the hint and put the jeep into gear. Jay and Lila jumped back in and away they went down the hill and into the valley. The rest of the caravan started moving sluggishly along after them like so many links in a dragging chain. The wind behaved differently in the valley, moving in wide arcs like water swirling in a large tub. Dust devils spun and swayed across the desert floor, and mirages flickered on the sand like distant tinsel. The passing vehicles spooked the desert floor into life as lizards, snakes, and huge crawling insects darted in all directions. Gozan brought the jeep to a stop about 50 feet from the edge of the lifeless circle. "If you don't mind, I'd like to wait here," he said, turning off the engine. The caravan rumbled down the hill and began to fan out behind them like animals coming to a watering hole. Dr. Cooper remained in the jeep and watched them all, not knowing whether to be irritated or simply amazed. He'd never seen anything quite like this. Bill, Jeff, and Tom brought the jeep and 2 trucks alongside, but they didn't get out and wouldn't until they saw Dr. Cooper do so. Dr. Cooper waited until the caravan, the cars, trucks, bicycles, sweating workers, crying children, trudging mothers, and mumbling beggars, was finally settled and quiet. And that took some 10 to 15 minutes. When the noise finally died down and things got quiet, he sat very still and listened for several more minutes. For the first time, in the absence of any machinery noise, they could hear the deep, guttural howl of the wind moving across the dragon's throat. The cavern rang with an eerie resonance like a huge bottle. The sound was quite mournful. From the big truck right next to them, Tom hollered, "What do you think, Doc?" Dr. Cooper was pretty casual when he said, "I have a viper here. I'm waiting for him to make up his mind." Jay and Lila leaned out of the jeep to look. Sure enough, right beneath their father's door lay a snake, looking up at them, his neck moving to and fro in graceful arcs, his tongue flicking the air. "What shoes do you have on?" Dr. Cooper asked them. Jay lifted his foot, as did Lila. Their boots were thick-soled, tough, leathered hiking gear. "Got another one over here," said Tom, pointing to a slithering iridescent band moving around the tires. "But not one inside the circle," Dr. Cooper mused. "So let's drive in there," Tom suggested. "No," Gozan blurted. "No further." Dr. Cooper watched as the viper finally decided to turn away and take his fangs elsewhere. "Okay, let's do it," he said, "but watch where you step." They carefully climbed out of their vehicles and deliberately made their way over the rocks. Gozan sat in the jeep, watching their every move, as did the hundreds behind them, sitting in or on their conveyances, parked along the perimeter of the circle, watching and waiting. Dr. Cooper, Jay, Lila, and the 3 crewmen made their way to the very edge of the circle. Dr. Cooper stooped down for a closer look. "Not even insects," he said. "Nothing enters the circle. Jeff and Tom, bring the trucks up here. Lila, prepare the Geiger counter." Dr. Cooper took the Geiger counter from Lila and held the sensors close to the edge of the circle. No reading. Jeff was making soil tests. No caustic substances, pretty natural stuff, just plain sand, high silica content. "Perfectly normal, in other words," said Dr. Cooper. "Jay, get out the walkie-talkies. I'm going to send you and Lila around the perimeter to look for the geophysical indications. Cracks, fissures, ashfall, anything that could give us a clue." Jay was already in motion. Dr. Cooper suddenly noticed Gozan joining the group at the circle's edge. "Well, hello there," said Dr. Cooper. Gozan shrugged. "You are still alive, and I do have my orders from the president." Dr. Cooper smiled. "So this is some kind of oddity. It doesn't fit any known pattern yet. Not a volcano, not a steam vent." Jay was ready with the walkie-talkies. "Head around the perimeter," Dr. Cooper instructed, "but don't step inside. Just watch your step and report anything that could be a clue. We'll keep in touch." Jay and Lila started around the rim of the circle, enduring the stares of the many observers as they passed by them. Gozan was smirking a little. "So, Doctor, you are not so quick to be brave after all." "One reason I'm still alive today is because I don't take chances. Well, not too many anyway." He spoke into the walkie-talkie. "Jay and Lila, how's it going?" "Nothing to report," came the answer. Dr. Cooper picked up a stone and threw it into the circle just to see if anything would happen. Gozan laughed at him. Doctor, the dragon's throat is taboo to foolish men, not to stones. Dr. Cooper poked his toe into the circle, scraped some of the sand as a little test, and then, without hesitation, took several full steps inside. Many cries and gasps were heard among the observers. He checked the Geiger counter. There was still no reading. He walked a little further into the circle, looking back toward the crowd. He could see their frightened eyes growing wide and their mouths hanging open. He spoke into his walkie-talkie. Jay and Lila, report. The two teenagers were still picking and choosing their way along. There had been no more snakes, at least that they could see, but Lila had accidentally crushed the tail off a scorpion, and Jay had pegged rocks at two lizards. It wasn't much of a report to give their father. They now came up against an outcropping of very large rocks that came right to the edge of the circle. They would have to go around them, working their way outward. Jay replied into his walkie-talkie, "Nothing unusual, Dad. We're about halfway around the circle. Can you see us?" "Yes," came their father's answer. "We'll have to duck behind these big rocks for a while. See you in a bit." A stiff, intermittent wind was kicking up on this side of the circle. The big rocks provided shelter from it, but clouds of dust were moving across the desert floor, temporarily obscuring their path. "Should have brought some goggles," Lila muttered, wiping and blinking her eyes. Suddenly she felt Jay's hand grab her arm. She froze, knowing it meant some kind of danger. She searched the ground for a threatening insect or reptile, but her eyes were drawn quickly to the same sight that had startled Jay. In a small pocket between two large rocks above them, the dust had dropped away during a brief lull in the wind, and there, as if appearing out of nowhere, stood a ghostly figure of a man. Old, gray, with a long, scraggly beard and dressed in a tattered robe. His face was dark, leathery, and wrinkled. His eyes were intense. He held a crooked staff in his hand, which he pointed at them. Jay whispered to Lila, "Do you see what I see?" "I think so." Jay shouted to the strange apparition, "Are you for us or against us?" The question sounded scriptural, and that gave Jay a little courage. The old man spoke in a voice that sounded like a rock slide as he pointed the crooked staff at them. "Americans, Christians, heed my warning. Do not go near the dragon's throat. Do not open the door." Lila piped up, "Who are you?" "Do not open the door. Only unspeakable evil and death await you." The stranger turned to leave. "Hey!" Jay shouted. "Wait a minute." But the wind carried a cloud of dust across the opening in the rocks, rather like a curtain being drawn across an exiting actor. When the dust had passed, the old man was gone. Now they had something to report. Jay reached for his walkie-talkie. "Dad!" Lila took a wrong step as she tried to see where the old man could have gone. Her foot kicked a rock aside, and what happened next was like a sudden explosion of horror. Hiss! They both froze in fear. A silvery shaft shot out from the rocks and curled up into a lethal question mark right in front of them. Dr. Cooper returned Jay's call. "Yeah, come in, Jay." Jay didn't answer. "Jay, did you call me?" Silence. Jay held the walkie-talkie close to his face, but the words wouldn't come. Lila huddled near him. Both of them were motionless. A long, narrow shadow, like a swaying palm tree, moved from side to side at their feet. The shadow of the huge king cobra, now rearing its head and hooded throat right in front of them. They were pinned against the rocks and had become like rocks themselves. Only their eyes moved, watching the snake's every motion. The cobra kept making a hideous hawking sound from deep in its throat, its white mouth gaping and its fangs glistening with venom. "Jay, are you there?" squawked the walkie-talkie. "Come in." The black eyes of the cobra seemed to bore holes right through them. It studied them, hissed at them, flicked out its long red tongue. The seconds turned into hours as sweat drew streaks in the dust on their faces, and they stared into the face of death. And that's the end of chapter 1.